Hello again. After reading your introductions and short bios, which outlined your educational interests, I thought it might be helpful if I offered some definitions of different forms of education that either implicitly address sustainability or simply have the word sustainability in the title. Terms like outdoor learning, outdoor education, outdoor experiential education, environmental education, education for sustainable development are all very similar and are often used interchangeably, but have deviated ever so slightly from one another and for different reasons. The constantly evolving definitions are potentially reflective of how academic disciplines require nuanced titles, or how academia is always seeking add-ons to reveal something previously overlooked. Perhaps these very similar fields are all trying to represent the ever-changing planet we inhabit, compounded by the increasing number and scope of environmental issues to address. So I begin with the term outdoor learning. Simon Beams, Robbie Nichol, and Pete Higgins state that outdoor learning covers all kinds of learning that might take place outside the classroom. They contend that there are 4 degrees of outdoor learning: the school grounds, the local neighborhood, day trip, field experiences, and expeditions. Furthermore, Beams, Atencio, and Ross point out that historically outdoor learning has been characterized by the development of a person's relationships with his or herself, others, and the natural environment. Outdoor learning has also been analyzed as education in outdoors, meaning outdoor activity, through the outdoors, referring to the personal and social development, and about the outdoors. Here the authors are referring to environmental education. Now, the Western concept of outdoor studies is comparable to the Norwegian understanding of friluftsliv, or the Danish approach termed udeskole, literally meaning out of school. Udeskole is characterized by compulsory educational activities outside the buildings of the school on a regular basis. It takes place both in natural and cultural settings such as forests, parks, local communities, factories, and farms. Udeskole activities are characterized by teachers making use of the local environment when teaching specific subjects and curriculum areas by, for example, measuring and calculating the volume of trees in mathematics, writing poems in and about nature for language-related tasks, or visiting historically significant places or buildings in history education. In Norway, friluftsliv is the tradition for seeking the joy of identification with free nature. Academically compared to many Canadian Indigenous worldviews, I can point to Leanne Simpson and Greg Lowen-Trudeau here, friluftsliv is a way of living and learning that emphasizes forming cultural connections to the land, values joy from being outside with each other, and does not depend on expensive equipment. Henderson and Potter argue that North American educators ought to embrace the friluftsliv tradition while departing from an obsession with creating and distinguishing between things like hard and soft skills, 2 incredibly overused and gendered terms. To clarify, hard skills are understood to be one's technical abilities while working in the outdoors, while soft skills refer to intra- and interpersonal proficiencies. Henderson proposed that with an increased emphasis on friluftsliv, educators can instead work with warm and green skills. Warm skills consider how we interact and behave with nature, and in how the educator works to create an overall ambiance within the group. So this is a crucial antecedent to developing a reconceived human-nature relationship. Green skills pertain to an educator's ability to ground the experience outdoors within stories, meanings, and contexts that are deeply relevant to the land and local culture. So please consider your own ideas of sustainability within these particular definitions. And similar to outdoor learning, a large body of scholarship has been written about outdoor education. Although it is commonly accepted that outdoor education is interdisciplinary, Japanese scholar Takano and Scottish academic Robbie Nichol argue that outdoor education is a contested term with many different understandings. From the Nigerian perspective, by Comfort Adinaki and Adelanunke Amos, outdoor education is a cultural construct which is thought about and applied in different ways within and amongst countries. The concept of outdoor education acknowledges the importance of selecting an appropriate place for education, as well as a technique for your means of learning. Now, while the above passage does not complicate previous definitions offered in this section, as the above authors explained that understandings of outdoor education differ depending on culture, it might be important to note that the perspectives from an African appear to be influenced by UK scholarship. Extending and questioning outdoor education, Barbara Humberstone explains that the term outdoor studies gained favor in the 1990s when the term outdoor education was deemed to be too limiting because it did not cover the full range of study and practice in education and in the outdoors. Concurrently, in the Western countries, outdoor education was becoming marginalized by school curricula. Humberstone suggests that the term outdoor studies fruitfully encompasses a broad range of approaches, foci, and methods such as, but not limited to, experiential learning, adventure education and outdoor leadership, organized camps, environmental education, nature-based sport, and wilderness therapy. The author notes that in any sphere, this fluid definition is governed by culture, policy, and history with political, temporal, institutional, chronological, and marketing determinants. While the term outdoor studies offers a broad definition, the term seems to suggest studying in the outdoors, which is different than outdoor learning. Other terms that are used interchangeably with outdoor learning are environmental education, education for sustainable development, and learning for sustainable development. It is important to define these terms, as literature often includes these three very similar concepts. So very comparable to the different cultural interpretations of outdoor learning, Bob Jickling discusses the ever-evolving understanding of outdoor education by tracing its historical use in the United States and Australia before relating it to a Canadian context. He proposes a new meaning for environmental education, focusing on what is educational about environmental education. Moreover, Jickling cautions against a single or exclusive definition of environmental education and education in general. As education is not a singular or precise idea, Jickling advocated that definitions be flexible, permissive, uncertain, vision-dependent to the extent of being incommensurable with its variance and even an idea for each of us to make up her or his mind about. As such, I agree with Jickling that in working with these definitions, scholars and practitioners alike need to invite others to participate in their application and perhaps a modification of this terminology. Recently, several roundtables across the province of Ontario have led to a renewed definition of environmental education, which is very similar to the definition of outdoor learning. Therefore, environmental education is an education about the environment, for the environment, and in the environment that promotes an understanding of rich and active experiences in and an appreciation for the dynamic interactions of 1. The Earth's physical and biological systems, 2. The dependency of our social and economic systems on these natural systems, 3. The scientific and human dimensions of environmental issues, 4. The negative consequences, both intended and unintended, of the interactions between human-created and natural systems. By extending and expanding the understanding of environmental education, education for sustainable development infuses learning about, in, and for the environment with human culture and economics. Since the 1992 Rio Summit, the United Nations began promoting education for sustainable development to achieve their Education for All and Millennium Goals. Education for sustainable development has been adopted by many nations that have implemented sustainable development into their educational mandates. Quite simply, sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of the future generation to meet their own. Now, many of you have flagged the Brundtland Commission, and so this will be quite familiar to you. As the importance of sustainable development has grown immensely due to global environmental degradation, education for sustainable development had a decade dedicated to its purposes. And much like outdoor learning, outdoor education, education for sustainable development, according to the United Nations, is a learning process or approach to teaching based on the ideals and principles that underlie sustainability and is concerned with all levels and types of learning to provide quality education and foster sustainable human development. Learning to know, learning to be, learning to live together, learning to do, and learning to transform oneself and society. As the decade for education for sustainable development has ended, the UN has revisited their Millennium Goals and offered new Sustainable Development Goals, also known as Global Goals. Of the 17 aims proposed by the UN, many of them are target issues around poverty, food security, health and well-being, quality education, and gender equality. Major contributor to UNESCO, Pete Higgins, argues that in order to meet these objectives, previous understandings of education for sustainable development will not suffice, and suggests that we now employ the term learning for sustainable development. The difference that learning for sustainable development has over its forebearers is that it includes 1. Education for sustainable development, 2. Global citizenship, and 3. Outdoor learning in nature. As such, my understanding is that learning for sustainable development includes formal and informal educational subjects and topics such as geography, ecology, environmental education, outdoor experiential education, global citizenship, education for sustainable development, community gardening, service learning, and any form of outdoor activity. The purpose of offering definitions for all of the terms that we have spoken about is to shed light on the overlapping possibilities, similar understandings, and to show that these described disciplines often share parallel and intersecting research programs. It is important to note, and as you will explore in the readings, there is a historical influence to consider in relation to the underpinnings of these disciplines, and it is crucial to understand this historical influence before delving into theoretical debates. It is equally important to critique and complicate these historical narratives and definitions, as they are often coming from people with positions of power and privilege at the expense of silencing those who understand the embodied experiences of environmental consequences.